this tragedy. From the moment that we learned of these attacks, the Department of Health and Human Services has begun readying teams and resources to be sent to New York City and the Washington area to meet any needs of state and local officials. So far, we have sent 4 disaster medical teams to New York City and 3 of these disaster medical teams to the Washington, Northern Virginia, Baltimore area. These medical teams each consist of about 35 physicians, nurses, and emergency medical technicians. They are all trained to deal with traumatic injuries and other emergency needs. We've also sent 4 disaster mortuary operational response teams to New York and 3 to the greater Washington area. We're also in the process of shipping a great deal of emergency medical supplies to New York City with the help of the Centers for Disease Control. In short, we're making the full force of the Department of Health and Human Services, both its resources and medical expertise available to the areas that need our assistance. We've also this afternoon activated the United States Public Health Service Commission Corps, which consists of approximately 6,000 health professionals. We also are giving backup assistance to the 500-bed ship Comfort from the United States Navy. Americans all over are calling up and asking what they can do. The best thing they can do is respond to this great call by volunteering to give blood. We need Americans to continue to answer that call. No matter where you live, please do your civic duty and assist us by donating blood. It is our primary job is to make sure Americans harmed by this tragedy get the help that they need. We will remain in constant contact with the governors, the mayors, public health officials, and other local officials to make sure that all their needs are being met. It is a sad day, but America and all of its citizens certainly share tonight in the grief that it's been caused. And as the President and everybody in his administration have said, we, the government, will continue to operate and continue to provide the services to all Americans.
One of the most cherished freedoms is the freedom of movement, the ability to move freely and safely. But today that freedom was attacked. But we will restore that freedom throughout the national transportation system as soon as possible.
We're looking at a picture also on Capitol Hill where the Senate and House leadership is preparing to speak, flanked by hundreds of members of the U.S. Congress. Here's the Speaker of the House, Dennis Hastert.
The hearts and souls and feelings of the victims and the families that were a part of this great tragedy that happened in this country today. Our prayers and thoughts and words of consolation goes out to all those who have suffered. But one thing that happens here in this place is when American suffers and when people perpetrate acts against this country, we as a Congress and as a government stand united, and we stand together. Senators and House members, Democrats and Republicans will stand shoulder to shoulder to fight this evil that's been perpetrated on this nation. We will stand together to make sure that those who have brought forth this evil deed will pay the price. We're not sure who this is yet. But we have our suspicions. And when that is justified and when those suspicions are justified, we will act. We will stand with the president. We will stand with this government. And we will stand as Americans together through this time. Thank you.
Today's 并部分倒塌。与此同时，联合航空公司一架由新泽西飞往旧金山的大型757客机也遭劫持，一名乘客还在机上打出911求救电话，并呼喊飞机被劫持。但仅几十秒钟之后，该客机便坠毁在宾州匹兹堡东南部的一片林地。10点钟左右，世界贸易中心第2座被撞的大楼整栋倒塌，110层的大厦瞬间化为灰烬，附近的救援人员和民众仓皇逃生。上午10点半，首先被撞到的世贸大楼建筑也轰然倒下，纽约最著名的地标从此也被夷为平地。另一方面，救援人员也在中午时间赶到位于宾州 Somerset 另一航班的坠落地点，但没有发现任何的幸存者。在纽约世贸大楼袭击发生之后，大量救援人员随即赶到，而相关的政府机构、联合国办公大楼也随即进行疏散。联邦飞航管理局则在世贸大楼被撞几十分钟之内停止了美国国内所有空中交通，并要求所有飞往美国的国际航班折返或在邻近的加拿大降落。美国空军也宣布，所有在美国上空仍然飞行的飞机将被空军列为可疑目标。全美各地的政府和商业中心也立即加强了保安，疏散员工，以避免可能的攻击。在被袭击地点的五角大楼，军方派出战机巡逻，防止更多的意外发生。在袭击事件发生之后，军方还派出2艘航空母舰前往纽约海域加强警戒。班机被劫的联合航空公司和美利坚航空公司确认，总共有4架航班客机在今天被劫持并用于袭击，总共有266人丧生。安全专家指出，如此周密计划的恐怖袭击活动背后，一定会有强大的组织甚或国家支持，而且也只有通过严格训练的恐怖分子，才有能力同时劫持多架大型客机，并以此来作为攻击武器。而美国官方更表示，有确切证据证明，今天发生的恐怖袭击事件与长期被追踪、藏匿在阿富汗境内的恐怖集团大亨班拉登有密切的联系。班拉登此前曾一再放话，要策动针对美国的大规模袭击。
今天发生在美国东岸的爆炸案可以说是全球新闻的焦点，而在湾区的话，各大中文报纸《世界日报》以及《星岛》也都发出了号外，都写个世纪灾难，而显现出这个爆炸案的恐怖以及规模之大啊！这个可以说是美国有史以来。
Everyone basically started running for the stairways. And we went in immediately to the stairways and started our way down.
Were people pushing and shoving, or was it an orderly exit from the building?
People were confused at first, but once we were in the stairway, people were very orderly.
How long did it take you to get out of the building?
About 45 minutes. Some people were upset. They had gone through the bomb in '93.
How could it take so long to get out of the building? You had 65 flights of stairs. You're a young man, but one would think you could get out of there quicker.
We moved very quickly, probably 15 minutes to the 40th floor. And then after that, we got held up. There were firefighters coming up the stairs, police officers, and I believe FBI agents. So they were coming up, and there were people. There was a man in a wheelchair who they were trying to assist, so we kind of had a hold for him. But people remained calm throughout this and kept saying, you know, we're going to take it one stair at a time. Everybody's going to get out. I think we weren't aware of the situation. We thought it was an isolated event. I think had we known what was going on, it would have been a different story. But
these pictures obviously show the unspeakable horror and tragedy, the fallout from which we're only just beginning to grasp. Once you got out of the building, at what point did you become aware of what had truly happened?
Well, I would say the minute as we came out of the building, actually exited the complex, the police officers were screaming, "Don't look up, don't look back, just go." And of course looked back, and I saw that the second tower was indeed on fire. And that's when it hit me that this was something major. I mean, this was a real catastrophic event. And actually, when we came out of the stairs, there was a lot of devastation in the lobby, and actually the center of the complex, the plaza area, there was a lot of debris and some bodies. I mean, it was truly awful.
We have some shots now that we'd like to show you of what some people have described almost as a nuclear winter when they talked about the amount of soot coming down on those of you who were fleeing these buildings. Now that you've been able to absorb what happened, what's going through your head tonight? You must feel like a very lucky man.
I feel very lucky. I'm so thankful to be alive. My heart goes out to those who don't know about their loved ones or have lost loved ones, and it's still very surreal. I mean, I look down behind us and can't believe that my office building that I go to every day is gone.
Matt, before you go any further, we were just looking at shots of the countless number of New York firefighters that were on the scene. We are just getting information from a union official of some of the 400 firefighters that initially went into that area. 200 may have perished. Matt, we appreciate your sharing your thoughts with us tonight on this incredibly tragic day of our American history. Let's go back to Wolf Blitzer. Once again, Wolf, New York City officials are not confirming, nor is the Pentagon, exactly how many people were injured here or how many people died. I know Governor Pataki of New York was saying earlier this evening it will be many, many days before we have any of those numbers.
Those numbers are being collected, but I'm sure it's way too early, as you point out, Paula, to have even a rough guess how high that number will eventually go. Just to recap once again, President Bush preparing to address the nation in less than an hour or so, around 8:30 p.m. Eastern, an Oval Office address for President Bush from the White House. CNN senior White House correspondent John King is back on the North Lawn of the White House. John, you're back in the briefing room now. John, you were listening to that briefing when we went to the Capitol Hill congressional leadership statements that were being made. Was there any hard news that came out of that briefing?
Indeed, there was, Wolf. Some details on the emergency responses taking place. The Department of Health and Human Services, the Federal Emergency
wake-up call to businesses throughout the country.
This has clearly been the day of days. This is a catastrophic event, and one that will probably change the way in which we live our lives in North America going forward.
Within minutes of the attacks in New York, companies large and small across the country began closing their doors and sending workers home.
building is closed for today.
Security specialists say every business needs to take a look at potential vulnerabilities.
The biggest proactive security
Relations between Iran and the Taliban in Afghanistan, neighbors of course, are extremely tense, very hostile. Afghanistan or the Taliban are Sunni Muslims, the Iranians are largely Shia Muslims. That's part of the split, but basically they're historically daggers drawn, so they certainly wouldn't be averse to seeing the Taliban being punished, although of course they would have mixed feelings because it is right on their borders, and just as Iraq was an enemy punished by the Americans, they're not comfortable about American intervention right on their borders, but they're certainly no friends of the Taliban.
Jim Muir in Tehran, thanks very much. It may be at least 24 hours before there's any accurate estimate of how many have died in the attack, but the mayor of New York said tonight the death toll would be more than any of us could bear. He also appealed for blood donations for the injured, who've been taken to 170 hospitals across New York.
Rescue workers overwhelmed by their task. For New York, this was a nightmare come true. The scale of the carnage remains unclear, but it's possible that many thousands of people may have been killed. It's still too dangerous for the authorities to search the rubble that was the World Trade Center. The National Guard has been sent in to relieve exhausted firemen. The hospitals are overwhelmed.
All right, well then let's go north then.
For a while, the city's mayor Giuliani was himself trapped in the emergency control center, which was close to the towers. Later, he said the city's hospitals had been coping with more than 2,000 injured, but it's clear there's much more bad news to come.
Good afternoon. The number of casualties will be more than any of us can bear ultimately, and I don't think we want to speculate on the number of casualties. The effort now has to be to save as many people as possible.
As survivors walked around days, no one could be sure how many did not escape before the towers collapsed. Some estimate as many as 20,000 could still have been inside. Across America tonight, families will be coming to terms with untold grief. Within a couple of hours of the attack, volunteers were queuing to give blood at this Red Cross center after the city's hospitals reported a critical shortage. Red Cross shelters are also being set up, offering support to the injured and
What is concerning their money-backed, greedy policy implemented to remove our individual rights and liberties worldwide. I share in the grief of those families must feel following today's events, but it seems from recent acts of leadership, plenty of money has been taken to prevent this tragedy. And this person emailed in, today is September 11th, or 911, our emergency number. He asked the question, coincidence? Pompano Beach, Florida, you're next.
Hi.
Go ahead.
Yeah, listen, I'm a former New Yorker. I live down in Florida now. And I happened to be listening to the radio this afternoon because I had to go somewhere in my car. And former Mayor Ed Koch was being interviewed, and he was asked what he thought of this incident and what he thought our response should be. And I would like every American who hears what I'm about to say, contact their congressman and or senator and ask them to bring this message to the president. Mayor Koch had what I thought was a very practical and logical approach to what should be done now. And that was, he said,
well, it was just a rumbling that we thought maybe more planes were coming across or whatever, but the rumbling just, we couldn't believe what we were hearing. We're looking all around, and then we did realize that it was coming from the buildings collapsing and the sound waves coming straight across the city. It was just devastating.
Peter Blangiforti, one of our engineers who's been working tirelessly throughout the day to bring pictures to our viewers. Peter, thanks very much. It was an unbelievable thing to see. Imagine the phone starts ringing, and you look out the window of the box in which you live, elevated above the city, and there is chaos below you. A ride to work doesn't happen. There are no cabs around. The subways are stopped. There are fears that it may happen again, and you walk up to Park Avenue, which so many people have seen in a gorgeous Christmas season, all lit up, and a look directly down Park Avenue, and looming in the distance where the World Trade Center used to stand, an enormous fire and a symbol of America crumbling around it. Osama bin Laden once said, and we do not know that he's responsible for this, but he once said he wanted those to come down. Osama bin Laden, a man of his who was charged in the embassy attacks in Kenya, was scheduled to be sentenced tomorrow morning in a courthouse directly across the street from the spot where the World Trade Center used to stand on this September the 11th, 9/11/01. James Kallstrom is on the line with us, former head of the FBI. Jim, what an enormous task is ahead. How the hell could something like this happen?
Yeah, that's the question. How could it happen? Yet it happened, and it happened with, beyond our, wildest imagination, or the wildest horror movie we could ever see. We need now to take care of all the families and the victims and all the people affected by this tragedy. We're a strong country. We'll get over this. We'll be stronger because of it. If you watched, and I know you did, the emergency workers and the volunteers and everyone on the streets of New York, the police officers, you saw a lot of bravery, a lot of camaraderie out there today, a lot of heroism, just like I saw firsthand in TWA. It's a tragedy. Now is not the time to blame and look for scapegoats. There's no one that I know of or ever knew of in law enforcement or the intelligence world that would ever want something like this to happen. They dedicated their lives to public safety and national security. So we'll be fine. We just have to get through this immense tragedy.
Jim, all of that said, and knowing, of course, that unlike the crash of that plane over which you toiled so tirelessly, there was a second disaster. New York City has the ability to mobilize relief forces like maybe no other in the world. Thousands of police officers converged on World Trade Center, police officers and firemen, before the World Trade Center collapsed on them. How is it possible that the most powerful and informed nation in the history of planet Earth could not know that an enormous coordinated attack on 4 fronts against the 2 towers of the World Trade Center, the Pentagon, and presumably Camp David, was happening and nobody knew?
Well, that's the question that everyone will be looking for answers to. But let me tell you this, the notion that we would know everything in the world and we'll know the intentions of every madman operating in small cells in the world, and that through technical resources and through limited people on the ground around the world over the course of the last couple of decades for a host of reasons, that we would know all this. We would hope to know it all. We would hope to never let anything like this happen. But it has happened. And I can tell you it hasn't happened because of malice or forethought. I don't know why it's happened. I don't know why we didn't get that bit of information that we got to stop the blind shake from blowing up the Holland Tunnel and the Lincoln Tunnel.
Yeah.
Oh, the bit of luck we had in the Philippines when Ramzi Youssef was about, 3 hours away or a day away from blowing up 10 jumbo jets simultaneously.
Yeah.
I don't know the answer to that, Shepard. It is the question.
Well,
I think we should put that answer off for a while.
Indeed.
And let's tend to other business.
What does Jim, I got to go in just a second, but what does the FBI do now? How does it come together? What resources does it mount? And how does it challenge them in just
being imploded just in slow motion coming right down toward us? We ran as fast as we could 2 or 3 blocks and luckily made it out past the debris. We got hit by a big cloud of white smoke, but...
All right, and later on you went back and you were in the middle of the dead and dying, correct?
Yeah. We pretty much immediately, as soon as we ran from that first tower collapsing, the smoke started to settle a little bit and we could hear that there were still people back in the smoke cloud. So myself and a bunch of firemen and some other EMTs ran back in, not too far, but just into the smoke to where the people were and started pulling people out.
How did you handle it? I mean, you don't
really think about it when it's going on. I mean, you mentioned that I'm an EMT. I've never obviously seen anything like this, but at the moment you're just thinking what to do. You're not really.
Well, but when you see somebody who's just died, Dan, I mean, it must have an effect on you as a human being.
It doesn't have an effect at that exact moment. It's not until later when you can really think about it and take it all in that it has an effect. At that time, there's the adrenaline, there's everything happening, and we really just needed to get the people that were not dying out or as far away as we could.
How many people did you work on yourself?
Altogether, probably 40 or 50. It was just stabilizing them, getting them out either to an ambulance or to some sort of help, and then going back in and taking the next person.
Did you have conversations with the people?
Yeah, I did. As we were taking them out, we tried to calm them down, tried to reassure them, tell them, that they just kept saying, "I can't believe it." They were completely distraught, and we would tell them, you're out, you made it, you're okay, the worst is over. But many people, especially the firemen, were worried about the people that did not make it out. One of the firemen that I took out, I said, how many firemen are in there? And he said, thousands. And I said, no, I mean, how many firemen are in the building? He said, thousands. And he started crying. And all the firemen were in tears because they knew that most of them did not make it out.
Right. And also, the firemen right now, they tell us there are 250 New York City firefighters who are missing. And what happened there was that after the initial explosion that you see now, firefighters and police both rushed into the building to help people out. But then, about an hour later, as firefighters and rescue workers were still working, the building collapsed, as Dan described, and a lot of those people were trapped inside. Is that about what happened, Dan?
That's exactly it. Like I said, the first tower came down. We went back, it moved our position further away from the building and started working on the people that were in there. We looked up and saw the second tower coming down and once again just hightailed it, this time all the way to the water. But like you said, in between those times, there were a lot of people rushing in, a lot of firemen going in, and there were firemen even up on the higher levels of the building trying to rescue.
So firemen had gone up to try to rescue people,
yeah.
And one of the most horrific images that we all as Americans have seen today were people hanging out of windows 100 stories high. You could see smoke and flames behind them. They were trapped, looking down to see if there was anybody to help them. Of course, there wasn't. And I understand some of those people actually jumped out of the windows.
Right. When I first arrived on the scene, and I was split up into a unit with the New York City Fire Department, I believe, were going to have us start going to get some of the people that were jumping. When I got there was people, I'd say about 10 people jumping from the top of the building out.
And of course they were killed instantly because there was really nowhere for them to jump to except for concrete.
they were jumping from levels that were so high, there's no way that would.
Right, and there's just no way authorities could have gotten them, but it was either that or, I guess, another form of death. That's what stayed with me, Dan. We're seeing it now on the screen, these poor, poor people. Now, when you spoke, did any of them feel anger? Did any of them feel, you see, I'm trying to get to the emotion of people that you worked on.
It was more just why people just kept saying, why, oh my God, and more of fear for those who didn't get out. I think the anger probably came a little later when they had time to calm down, but people were just confused, shocked, and really worried about everyone else who hadn't made it out.
Right, and their own families too, allowing people to know that they're alive. Mm-hmm. People think when something like this happens that it's very orderly, but it isn't. It's just a whole bunch of rescuers there trying to do whatever they can on the spur of the moment, correct?
It was, when I first got there, it was actually quite orderly. I was very impressed. They instantly set up command posts. Like I said, they put me on what they called a fast team with 2 other EMTs from New York City Fire Department. We were going to go in fast, grab as many people as we can, get them out fast. What happened was, as the first and second towers came down, it came down on top of all the orders. So the command post, the treatment area, everything was covered. And from that point on, it was pretty much chaos.
Did you see anybody get buried by debris when it came down? They couldn't get away?
Well, I didn't see them get buried because we were running as fast as we could, but I know that a lot of people did not make it.
And the reason that you ran again was that you heard a noise and looked up and saw.
The first time I heard what sounded like, I thought it was another airline. It sounded like a jet about to land basically on our heads. It turned out it was the building coming down.
And you saw it, physically saw it?
Yeah, we heard it first, looked up and saw it and just started running. The second time, someone actually yelled, "The tower's leaning, the tower's leaning." Everybody just dropped what they were doing and ran.
All right, Dan. Well, we're glad you're safe, and we appreciate the good work you did both as a journalist and as an EMT, and I'm sure that the people that you helped appreciate it as well. I want to go now to freelance photographer Tim Hinton, who barely escaped with his life, and who took some of the most dramatic photos of people who were trapped in the building. Mr. Hinton, sights and sounds, what stays with you above all else?
I think what stays with me the most is after the first building collapsed, I spoke to a few firemen who were heading into the other building, quite bravely and unselfishly, and they grabbed their gear and they went right back in, and I'm sure those guys have passed now. I think the image of those 4 firemen going in is what sticks with me.
Now, you got down there pretty quickly, responded to it. When Dan said at first it was pretty orderly, and then when the building started to collapse, all chaos broke out because obviously all the command centers were buried.
Well, I was on the
go ahead.
I was on the west side of the buildings during the collapse, and when the buildings came down, it was quite hectic. People were running for cover. We were caught in darkness for a few moments, and then as the dust cleared, me and the firemen were trying to get their gear together so that they could do their jobs, and they were all in shock. They didn't quite know what to do. How to react.
Nobody would. Now we're going to show some of your pictures here that you took of these poor people up there. Tell me, as a photographer, I mean, you've seen a lot of terrible things.
Right.
Is it hard to take a picture of somebody who's going to die in about 10 seconds?
Yeah, I mean, the first couple of jumpers that I saw, I resisted shooting them. I just didn't think it was right. I just actually didn't even think of the fact that I had a camera on me. Then after a few moments, I thought, well, this is what I'm here. I want to show. At that point, I didn't know it was terrorism. I thought it was an accident or something. I really had very little information on the ground there. And I just wanted to show kind of what was happening so that people could see it and that it wouldn't be forgotten.
When you were working and you were photographing, could you hear other people around you and the panic? Did that register while you were trying to shoot your photographs?
Well, it was eerily quiet. The policemen and the firemen were very civilized, very orderly. I think what sticks with me the most is the sprinkling of the glass as it was falling off the World Trade Center and the occasional thump of a body.
here. By noon, as far as travelers were concerned, the airport terminals were deserted. All passengers went home or to nearby hotels as directed by the airport.
In light of these events, QVC will be temporarily suspending its broadcast. You can help. Call 1-800-4...
Pictures just in, and of course by now we all know that an hour and a half after these pictures were taken, that building collapsed. There's another item we need to report. The Washington Post is now reporting, as we reported on the 6 o'clock news, that a Bay Area man called his parents, his mother, from one of those doomed planes to say that he was going to die. Now we're learning, or the Washington Post is reporting, that many of the passengers on that plane were ordered to call their loved ones, were herded into the back of the plane at knife point and ordered to call their loved ones all over the Bay Area and all over wherever they were going to tell their loved ones that they were going to die. Now, we also want to give you a quick update to tell you what to expect tomorrow here in the Bay Area. All 3 Bay Area airports are...
How long it takes.
We interrupt our regularly scheduled programming for this special presentation of BET News, Attack on America.
Incredible devastation that has followed. Monsignor Jim Lasante of the Catholic Church is with us right now. Linda?
We also have some more information to bring in, perhaps a very bitter coincidence. It so happens that September 11th was declared an International Day of Peace by the United Nations. Today, that we're obviously seeing that the declaration of that date is so very, very sad. Also getting information about some of the victims who were aboard those planes. There were 4 of them hijacked and crashed. 2 American Airlines, 2 United Airlines. They're beginning to release more and more of the passenger manifest. What is perhaps most important right now is that intelligence sources are telling us they believe that on one of those hijacked flights there was a person who was connected with Osama bin Laden, and that person may have some connection in Broward County, Florida, or Daytona Beach, Florida, and that the FBI may be preparing to launch some sort of search in those areas. We're also getting word of other people who were on board those flights. We have mentioned before that Barbara Olson, a colleague here at Fox News, a frequent political commentator, was on board the plane that took off from Dulles Airport and ended up crashing into the Pentagon. Word now coming in that the passengers were herded in the back of the plane and told to call their loved ones and let them know that that plane was going down and that they were going to die. Also, more information coming in about others who were on board. The American Airlines Flight 11 from Boston to Los Angeles. Among others, we now know that the executive producer of the NBC TV show Frasier was on board that plane, along with his wife. Also, the co-founder of a very well-known technology company called Akamai, also on board American Airlines Flight 11 from Boston. More and more names coming in, but we are getting more and more information from those manifests. They are not complete yet. American Airlines, United Airlines, trying to reach all the relatives of those on board those planes, and until they do so, they will not give us a complete list of the manifests. John?
Before we go back to Monsignor Lasante, let's go to our Derry Alexander, who is at St. Vincent's, where they've been handling the wounded and the burned and the maimed and all of those injured today. Derry has some new information about what is going on there now. Derry?
Yeah, actually, John, over my shoulder, you can see they're actually bringing out a police officer, New York City police officer. There you see him on a gurney. I'm understanding that they are actually going to start digging again down at the World Trade Center. So they're expecting in the next couple of hours for things to get very, very busy here at St. Vincent's. Apparently, there's been a bit of a lull. You see another officer on a gurney. This officer actually laying down, and he does not look to be conscious. There are several emergency workers around him, and I guess they're going to be lifting him off very, very carefully here. This is actually a bit more than we've seen in the last few moments. They just picked him up. He appears not to be moving at all. Like I said, this is a bit more action that we've seen in the last half an hour. We understand when they begin digging, and we saw lots of heavy construction equipment heading south towards the World Trade Center. Apparently, they're expecting to have a lot more, many more people arriving at the hospital. Altogether today, they've seen 362 people. They've had 4 deaths. One, a firefighter, apparently had a heart attack, just overcome by all of the destruction. 50 major injuries. You know, the interesting thing that Mayor Giuliani was saying earlier was that he was saying the city doesn't need any more volunteers. Apparently at this hospital, they had 500 doctors show up, 150 nurses show up, all volunteers from all over the city, all 5 boroughs, Long Island, upstate New York, New Jersey. They said they've been overwhelmed with volunteers. But the other thing is, interestingly enough, we've been saying all over the place and actually all over the country, we've been talking about how they need blood. Well, apparently right here at St. Vincent's, they've turned away people. They're saying that they do not need blood. They're in very, very good supply. And one of their major strategies here, they seem to be very, very together. One reason because they were a main artery for victims during the 1993 bombing at the World Trade Center. So they've been through this before. Most of the injuries then were smoke inhalation, but they've been through this before. They get the people who are...
Our coverage that we're, thanks, Lynn, thanks, Judith, very much. Judith Kipper, who's been in our Washington Bureau. We're going back and forth on this story. We have this enormous human tragedy in one case, which we try to cover, and then this enormous challenge to the United States government. The United States is a nation, but the United States government, and what the United States is going to do about it. What does it know at this point, which appears to be very little. But this tendency, fueled somewhat by the analysts who study the history of international terrorism and by a couple of observations by Senators Graham of North Carolina tonight and, Senator Edwards of North Carolina and Senator Hatch of Utah today, that the CIA at this point has picked up in its monitoring of telephone conversations post the attack some contact between supporters of Osama bin Laden. And it makes sense in most everybody's mind that on an occasion like this, Osama bin Laden is one of the prime suspects, just based on the history of the whole thing. And it's also probably very important for us to remember, as Judith Kipper points out, that the United States in the region and in the Muslim world generally is seen very much as a staunch and unswerving and sometimes indiscriminating ally of Israel. So there are Palestinians and people in the Arab world tonight who believe that if they punish the United States, they're punishing Israel. If they punish the Israelis in their conflict with the Palestinians at the moment, it's also important to punish the United States. But let us come back now to the immediacy of the tragedy. WCVB, ABC's station in Boston, reports tonight that one car has been taken away from Logan Airport in Boston, which there is they want to know whether or not this was a vehicle that was used by one of the people who hijacked an American Airlines or United Airlines plane out of Boston today. Let me just read quickly what it says. We are able to report that it was a Mitsubishi Mirage. It had Virginia plates. We haven't got the license plate number yet. FBI Forensics has the car at an off-site garage. It was actually towed by the state police. Included in the 6 bags of evidence confiscated by the FBI were chairs that...
Flashlights. If you don't have any lights, then let me know. Oh, no! Then that tower collapses too. And we had some time to get some of the people out, but then there was those secondary explosions and then the subsequent collapses. So I don't know how many people were in there. I know there was a lot of firefighters, a lot of public safety personnel were in there. You call her and you tell her, let her hear your voice. She's going to need to hear your voice. Just like you need to hear my voice, I'm okay. I'm okay. Thank you. Bye. See you later. I love you. All day long, more fallout. Because it might be a bomb in the school, maybe. A reported bomb threat. A dangerous gas leak. This is Ed Sullivan. I want that building evacuated. All civilians, please head north of Moore Street. Then, a nearby building collapses from the day's damage.
You are watching Building 7 at the World Trade Center collapse.
Amid the destruction and devastation, though, one remarkable thing did happen. Today's tragedy brought out the best in a city not always...
on which buildings they're most worried about. The Millennium Hotel, One Liberty Plaza, a building on the south side of the plaza on Greenwich Avenue. We can't be sure which one they're most concerned about, but what we know for certain right now is that authorities are worried that some of those buildings or one of those buildings may collapse, so they've asked everyone to leave the area. And of course, Peter, after yesterday's events and so many rescue workers getting caught up in the rubble. No one here is taking any chances, and they were evacuating people immediately.
The wire services, George, that reported that in fact what had actually happened down there was that the remainder of the southern tower had collapsed. Does that make sense to you?
Peter, it's probably both, to tell you the truth. There were cranes working on the southern tower, and they may have pulled down part of that, and there was a fire, as I reported earlier, inside that structure. But in addition to whatever is happening to that southern tower skeleton, there is also a concern among authorities here about other buildings being in danger of collapse.
Number on the number of buildings which are in danger have been affected. I don't expect you to be particularly accurate, but we did hear from one doctor who'd been in on the inside. He said he thought he'd heard that 40 buildings had been affected.
When I was inside, Peter, I didn't see that many, but I certainly saw 5 or 6, which had such severe damage I could never imagine them ever being rebuilt. And you don't know what's happening inside those buildings, even as you're looking at them from the outside. But clearly, Peter, even beyond that square right around the World Trade Center, there were buildings even farther out with windows blown out and other kinds of damage.
Thank you, George. As a reminder of the atmosphere down there, as you were talking, a young woman walked past George and turned around the corner, of course, wearing a face mask, as a lot of people are in downtown Manhattan today, because the air is just poisonous with dust and soot and everything else that has just simply been the result of this explosion. Got a couple minutes before the top of the hour to hear quickly from Betsy Stark on the status of the financial markets generally. Betsy, people in the United States today who wanted to trade or had the need to trade? Oh, it is. Okay. As did the President Bush. Talked to President Putin in Russia today. He talked to the Israeli Prime Minister, Ariel Sharon. He talked to Yasser Arafat, the President of the Palestinian Authority. Very relevant conversations given all of the violence in that today. The only person who we've notably not talked to, we could tell, was General Pervez Musharraf, who is the military leader in Pakistan, and there is some serious question now about the sentiments in Pakistan tonight vis-a-vis the Taliban in next-door Afghanistan and support for any moves like this, but it's a little too early to nail any of this down. But we are going to pause for a few seconds now to allow local stations who are going to go to their local news to do that, and our coverage here will continue.
Of others believed buried inside that mess.
And government officials say the terrorists who destroyed the World Trade Center and ripped through the Pentagon may have intended instead to hit the White House and Air Force One as well.
You mentioned Osama bin Laden as a Saudi citizen. We in the kingdom, the government and the people of Saudi Arabia refuse to have any person affiliated with terrorism to be connected to our country. He was disowned by his family. His citizenship was terminated a long time ago because of his terrorist activities.
Decided that a country in the region was in any way complicit in this attack today. We're joined in the Senate gallery in Washington by Senator Tom Daschle, who is the majority leader in the Senate now, the Democratic leader, and the majority leader in the Senate today. Senator Daschle, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Peter.
Nice to see you again, sir. Thank you very much. Under much different circumstances than I saw you the last time, of course, which was when we bumped into each other on a vacation. We never thought we'd be talking like this. What's it been like on the Hill today?
Well, today it's been a little more calm. I think that
of the rescue workers today, this afternoon, in that particular area. Now, the White House spokesman Ari Fleischer has said today that the White House and Air Force One were also targets. We'll investigate that. ABC News has learned that investigators believe they've identified all 12 of the people who hijacked the 4 planes. And several people in Florida and in the Boston area have been detained and certainly questioned in connection with the attacks. At the Pentagon today, this was a very moving scene this afternoon. Rescue workers unfurled a large American flag from the roof of the building, their way, in part, we think, of welcoming President Bush, who paid a visit to this afternoon. We'll have that. The President, in a meeting of his cabinet this morning, said the U.S. was committed to a monumental struggle of good versus evil, and it is not yet clear how the U.S. is going to respond or against whom. As you have seen repeatedly throughout the day, a cloud still hangs over lower Manhattan tonight, and just south of our newsroom here. A few people have been pulled from the rubble that was the World Trade Center. The news from there, we have to tell you, you can look at it and understand, is very grim indeed. We went to the scene today, and with hope, one doctor told us, and he came out with a feeling of despair. Many people are believed dead. Nobody wants to put a number on it. We know how many people worked in the area. We do know that the numbers at the Pentagon are lower than certainly were estimated in the public arena yesterday, and that is as far as we got with those numbers, but we'll come back to them. Throughout the day, we have been getting the first reasonable clues as the result of the investigation as to who may have been responsible. So we're going to start this World News Tonight with a report from ABC's Brian Ross.
Peter, the investigation is moving with great speed, with new developments even as we speak at this hour. FBI agents are dusting for prints at the Dulles airport. They've carried out a search warrant at a boarding house in Hollywood, Florida. And in Germany, police in Hamburg are active tonight. From Boston to Florida, heavily armed FBI agents and local police moved quickly and forcefully today to investigate what the Attorney General called acts of war.
The Department of Justice has undertaken perhaps the most massive and intensive investigation ever conducted in America.
As at this hotel in Boston, agents were looking for evidence of the terrorist movements and seeking to unravel what was an elaborate network that operated undetected for more than a year before yesterday's coordinated attacks.
The 4 planes were hijacked by between 3 and 6 individuals per plane, using knives and box cutters, and in some cases making bomb threats.
Starting last night, the FBI seized a car left at the Boston airport that led them to the identity of one of the estimated 12 terrorist hijackers, an Egyptian national by the name of Mohammed Atta.
We also have identified through a number of leads, principally at the cities of origin, a number of individuals whom we believe may have had something to do with the hijackings, and we are pursuing those leads aggressively.
By this morning, agents were at a small airport in Venice, Florida, where Atta and an accomplice took flying lessons and earned private pilot's licenses in the summer of 2000. A fellow student said the two had lots of money and kept to themselves.
They were talking about flying for a private company, like Richman and stuff like that.
The 2 men stayed at a nearby house where they were remembered as rude and unlikable.
Very sarcastic, and it gave me the impression that they didn't really care that highly for ladies or whoever, and that's about it.
Also today, authorities were tracking another set of 6 hijackers who were believed to have entered the country from Canada at a small border crossing in Jackman, Maine. The men are then believed to have flown into Boston on commuter flights yesterday morning from Bangor and Portland, Maine, with the thought of clearing security at the smaller airports instead of Boston.
Each one was carrying some type of small shoulder bag, not a real bulky one, but something small. Both kind of dark complected, dark hair.
Peter, there are dozens of leads FBI agents are working on. No one has been arrested, but several people have been detained for questioning. By one estimate, as many as 50 people may have been involved in helping provide the network for the terrorists to operate in this country over the last year. Peter.
Very much, Brian Ross, who's been working on the investigation. I don't think anybody's been working harder on this investigation than John Miller has, who has been with us day and night on this. So take this and enlarge it or add to it as you will in terms of what we really think is going on today.
Well, the roundup, and I don't mean the roundup of people, the roundup of what's going on in the investigation, 3 are being held in Boston. We'll get back to them. 3 were arrested or detained. There are some semantics here. From a train in Providence, Rhode Island, being held on immigration charges.
This is where Amtrak was actually stopped and people were taken off and people were
Federal agents boarded the plane, identified these people and have detained them. FBI agents in Newark are looking for the trail of several men they believe who departed on that flight from Newark to San Francisco. So what you see what you see is the FBI is assuming that there are 12 to 25 or 26 hijackers, depending on if each flight had, you know, 3 or 6, are presumed dead in the crashes. But they are seeing traces that there were other people, associates, support people left behind. Now, what they're doing is something they've done before. Right around the Millennium celebration, when they felt that there was an imminent attack, they used the immigration laws to sweep out through Boston, again, ironically, and other cities, and pick up people who were on their watch lists, who they had information and tips about. Today in Boston, you see this dramatic scene unfolding. A heavily armed Boston SWAT team entering the Westin Hotel just off Boylston Street in Copley Plaza. This came about when FBI agents followed the paper trail from that car at the airport, the car they believe the hijackers used, to a hotel. They were not expecting to find anyone in the hotel room. To their surprise, as they approached to conduct a search, 3 people came out of the room, 2 women and a man. They put them in custody to identify them, to question them, and ultimately they are also being detained on an immigration charge. Searched the room. What they found inside, no explosives, pamphlets, papers though, and they said hair dye, which they are suggesting may have been used by some of their suspects to change their appearance so that they wouldn't appear to be as they were described by hotel workers.
One of the things that seems to me to be a change from yesterday to today, we have this huge failure in intelligence yesterday knowing this was happening, but if everything we're getting today is reasonably solid, then the leaving of the trail by the perpetrators has enabled law enforcement to move pretty quickly.
I would say so, and what you see here is the things they learned in Florida, that they obtained pilot's licenses, that they went for higher grades of pilot license, some of the time invested here, that they left this car behind in Boston after having an argument, that they registered under the same name as the paper trail. Of course, suicide bombers are not generally concerned with the trail that they leave. They don't have to worry about being caught by the law. But what the law is hoping, the FBI and the intelligence community, is that they will get associates who had knowledge, who aided or abetted, and that from those people they'll glean a better look into who is really behind this. And that's why this is geared up with such energy now.
Thanks very much, John Miller, who has been with us throughout the day and will be with us throughout the evening. I think the most startling thing we heard today was that the White House, in the person of the president's spokesperson, said that the White House itself was actually a target of one of the groups of terrorists on one of the aircraft, and that takes us immediately to the White House and ABC's Terry Moran. Terry, there's that, and then we'll come in a minute to the president's visit to the Pentagon this afternoon. Start with the message that the White House might have been a target.
It was as clear as could be, Peter, because today Ari Fleischer at the briefing said that the White House in this investigation had developed what he called specific and credible information that the White House and Air Force One were intended targets. And then Ari Fleischer went on to say that this investigation had led them to believe that the plane that hit the Pentagon was actually originally intended to hit the White House. This opens a whole raft of questions, but let me take you back to those harrowing moments. About 34 hours ago, the White House was being evacuated. First, White House staffers told to leave the building in an orderly fashion, and then an agent coming in, we are told, and saying, no, just run. Just get out. And you can see that people did exit the building very, very quickly. At this time, as the White House was being evacuated, the President of the United States was in Sarasota, Florida, and he took off from Sarasota, originally intending to come back to the Washington area, to Andrews Air Force Base. The plane was diverted to Barksdale Air Force Base outside of Shreveport in Louisiana. And the White House says Air Force One itself was a target. ABC's Ann Compton was on that flight. She said it flew at an unusually high altitude, 40,000 feet. When it landed in Shreveport, reporters on board were told not to let people know where they were. The president made a statement there and then took off for Nebraska. And while they were in the air, they were accompanied by fighter jets off of each wing. This dramatic evidence of the level of threat that the Secret Service and the military authorities believed that the president was under.
Now, Terry, as we talked a little earlier today, you pointed out that there isn't much other business being done at the White House today, and there hasn't been much else done in the Congress as well. But the president did want to go over to the Pentagon to express his sentiments to the people there, and he did so just a short while ago.
Yes, he did. In fact, he is still there, we are told. The president remains inside the building now. A little while ago, he went to the Pentagon and toured the damage and the destruction with Secretary Rumsfeld. He told the rescue workers who were assembled there that he was overwhelmed by the destruction that he saw. He told them that he was grateful to everybody who was working there heroically, as he said, to search and rescue if there was any rescue to be done. He also thanked Americans for giving blood in the numbers that they have. He said being there made him sad and made him angry. He said the United States will not be cowed by this act and that we will go on, echoing the kinds of comments he's made throughout. This was a visit that we are told he wanted to make in spite of what we are told are continuing concerns about the president's security.
Thank you very much, Terry Moran at the White House. We'll be back to you throughout the evening. Now let us turn to the two crime scenes themselves, the Pentagon and New York itself, but particularly New York, where everybody continues to believe that there has been a huge loss of life and nobody really wants to or is in a position to say so. But ABC's Diane Sawyer has been monitoring this and covering this all day long. Diane, what's the current situation and what has the day really been like?
Well, Peter, first let me tell you that I've come up here on this roof about 4 blocks from the World Trade Center because I want to talk first maybe about a purely symbolic casualty. I'm going to send you 2 postcards. Here is a postcard of the skyline of New York as everybody has known it up till 2 days ago. And here is a postcard of the skyline as it is now. I also heard down on the ground some worrying news. They are talking about 4 buildings now, 4 additional buildings in shaky condition. The one they're most worried about is the giant Millennium Hotel. We know that yesterday night the windows had all melted in it, and they're saying now it is in a worrying condition. If it should collapse, think of what it's going to add to the work of the rescue teams as they try to sift through all the debris. Earlier, I know you reported and you showed everybody what it was like here when the rest of World Trade Center Tower #1 went down, that spiny metal cathedral that was standing and groaning last night when I went down there to see it. It collapsed. People were terrified. They were racing from the scene. And of course, as you said earlier, smoke is now just cascading over all of Manhattan, and there are health advisories about the asbestos, plastic, and smoke in the air. Now, the casualty figures that you have talked about, the grim ones, we have been calling, we have been searching. Here's all I can tell you at this point. 11,000 people reportedly at local hospitals. 2,000 of what they're calling the walking wounded ferried over to New Jersey for treatment there. We're talking about the 55 known dead in addition to the 266 who were on the planes. We keep calling and saying, do you have any sense at all how many people have been reported missing? No sense at all how many people have been reported missing, as now the 3,000 to 5,000 rescue workers, teams of dogs, metal detectors, sound detectors, people looking for just the sound of somebody scratching on metal are out there trying to find people still in the field. And in just a few minutes, I'm going to take you down on the field and show you some of these emotional stories from the rescue workers there. But I'll tell you, Peter, if you want another symbol, it was the police officer who was downstairs on the curb as I came up, head in his hands, tears in his eyes, and he just looked up and said, it's just too tough. Peter?
Thanks very much, Diane Sawyer. And as Diane makes clear, we're going to go back to her before.
When the World Trade Center towers collapsed, the loss, they say, makes them redouble their efforts.
Our job is here and our job is now, so we continue to do that, if nothing else, to memorialize the greatness of these men and women that were killed yesterday.
It is a job that will only intensify in the coming days. John Yang, ABC News, the Pentagon.
And the president, of course, did see that flag because he was over at the Pentagon a short while ago and did see the flag which the firefighters had hung on the side of the building which he was going to visit. The Transportation Secretary said today that the government is going to allow very limited air travel to resume, and by this, Mr. Mineta means travelers whose flights were diverted during or immediately after the attacks in New York and in Washington may continue on their routes. But the country's air system is still very much in jeopardy. ABC's Lisa Stark, ABC's Lisa Stark covers aviation for us. Thanks very much, Lisa.
Well, Peter, we had hoped early in the day that sometime around noon Eastern time, the Federal Aviation Administration would reopen the nation's airspace. Airlines could start resuming some sort of scheduled service. As the day went on, it was clear that was not to be, that the security measures were simply not in place yet to allow that to happen. So as you've reported, as of tonight, we have only very limited air service here in the United States.